Unless you've had a lived experience of suicide, it's extremely hard to put yourself in the shoes of somebody going through it. But for the person at risk of suicide, it can be extremely helpful for them to hear from someone who's been to that dark place and come out the other side. Michelle Debenham and Tyson Hill are two people who know just how important sharing lived experience can be. They both have lived experience of suicide, and now they use that experience as part of their day-to-day jobs to help others through their own experiences. Michelle as Coordinator of Suicide Prevention in Gippsland for Wellways, and Tyson as a lived experience worker. We're in Warragul for our chat with Michelle and Tyson, and we're starting out by asking Michelle about her role in the Gippsland Suicide Prevention Project.
The main aim is to reduce suicide. There are two projects, so they're divided in half. One is the Community Gatekeeper Education Project. The other one is to work with people with a lived experience of mental health issues, educate and work with them as a team to help other people who are experiencing significant mental health issues. The two projects are kind of separate, but they tend to gel into each other. In this last year, we've been working with specific community members who are overrepresented or have higher suicide statistics than the general community. And those three groups are the LGBTIQ community, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community, and men, because men are 76% of our suicide statistics.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you got into this space in the first place?
So I guess lots of different things. I had my own lived experience of suicide as a young person, or as a young mum when I came down here to Gippsland. So that was something I considered. Glad I didn't go through with it, but something I considered because I guess I was isolated as a parent on my own with two very young children. I moved down to Gippsland, and at the same time my mum, who was my only relative here in Australia, died. So it was a pretty awful time. And then recently I had a couple of friends whose children took their own lives, and there wasn't a lot of support or a lot of education around that. And also a friend whose daughter was self-harming, and they couldn't get any support and didn't really understand what it was about. So I guess that's what made me think it would be a good space to get into. I had a friend who was working in mental health, and she was telling me all the great things they were doing to support people. And I was a teacher at the time, I was a primary school teacher, and I kind of felt like I was just going from one year to the next, pass the kids on, and I didn't feel it wasn't fulfilling for me at the time. And this friend of mine was telling me about what they were doing, and I was thinking, that's what I want to do. I want to help people. I want to make a difference. I feel like that this project has made a huge difference to a lot of people's lives, and people have told me it has.
Really?
People have said, you saved me by doing this. This is something that if I didn't have, I wouldn't have got through COVID or stuff like that. So, yeah, makes it feel like it's all worth it. So,
Tyson, I'm going to bring you in here at the moment. Do you want to maybe kind of introduce yourself and explain what you do?
It's a long story, so I'll try and condense it. But straight out of school, I had a psychotic episode, didn't really know what was going on, ended up in the psych ward in Traralgon. Then through the next sort of 6 years, I was medicated. I came out of hospital. I got a job. I was an apprentice mechanic. Went off my medication at one point a few years later and ended up back in hospital. And then sort of at the end of the 6 years, I decided to go off my medication again and ended up back in hospital. So that's the psychotic sort of thing. And then the last psychotic episode I had, I was a fully qualified mechanic, and I had a psychotic episode, went into hospital, came out, and I'd lost a lot of confidence in my work and things weren't really the same. And from that, I developed a depression. But being a mechanic, you've sort of got to be confident in your work. You know, you do up a bolt, and then if you're thinking about it 10 minutes later, did I do up that bolt? You probably, shouldn't be working, because things can go wrong if you don't do things up tight enough in that sort of industry. And I was second guessing everything I was doing, even, the simple jobs that I've done heaps of. I was second guessing what I was doing, and it was causing me a lot of stress. My boss was saying there was no fault in my work, but I felt in myself that I wasn't doing the same job that I had done, for the past 5 years or whatever. So I just hated my job at that point in time. And I decided that it was time for a change in career, because I needed to do something. I needed to change something for what I was feeling to change. I was looking for something else, and I was applying for other jobs, like Coles or like just random jobs. So I saw a job for a peer support worker in the paper. And yeah, I applied for it thinking, oh yeah, I'll give it a crack. Didn't really know what I was doing, but yeah, learn along the way, and yeah, I got to meet some really amazing people and help some really amazing people. And I wasn't just dealing with suicidal things, it was all things mental health. So I sort of have a broad range of lived experience of having the psychosis as well as the depression and the suicidal thoughts too. So yeah, it gives me a good understanding of what other people are going through and how to help people and what people want to hear. And once I got into it, I fell in love with it. Like I found my calling, like this is the space that I'm supposed to be in. To turn such a negative experience or negative experiences over that 6 years into such a positive, it's really empowering. Like Michelle, I've had people say that I changed their life, and that sort of thing really sticks with you, and you go, yeah, I'm actually making a difference.
I want to understand a little bit more, because this podcast is going to be listened to by people with kind of no experience of suicide. They have, potentially pretty casual contact with people who might be at risk of suicide. What's one thing that you'd kind of like people to understand about having gone through that they might not understand because they haven't gone through it?
I guess the main thing is that if in your gut you're worried about someone, that you notice that the things that they are doing are not what they would normally do, like staying at home if they're a party animal, or, if they're a really great footy player or something and they just give up footy, that in your gut, if that says to you, I'm worried about that person, don't be frightened to ask them if they're okay. You don't have to ask them about suicide straight away, but asking them if they're okay and what's going on, and saying, I noticed that you're not going to footy training anymore. I noticed that you're not, riding your bike or running anymore. Is everything okay? Because I'm a bit worried about you. And that shows to someone that once you've noticed, you care, and two, that you're a trustworthy person to talk to, because there still is, doesn't matter how much we try and, educate people, there still is stigma around mental health and suicide. And I guess that's the biggest thing we can do, is to reduce that stigma so people feel okay to talk about it. People still feel shame about suicide or mental health issues. And I think if we could ever get rid of that, if we could make it like I broke my arm and there's no stigma attached to that, then I think there would be less suicide and less mental health, or it wouldn't get to that high level, that real crisis level where it takes a long time for people to recover.
Tyson?
I guess the family and the friends, it's hard because they don't want to nag the person into, talking. They sort of need to encourage that it's okay, and to sort of normalise it, as Michelle said, and reduce that stigma so that it is okay for that person who is going through this to come forward and speak about it. And I guess to the person that is going through this, from experience, I know that it does get better, and that's probably the main message. Like, it might be, short-term suffering now, but in the long run, it can get better, and it.
Yeah, I think providing hope is a huge thing, isn't it? And I think that's what lived experience does, because people don't want to hear from people that haven't had that experience themselves. They want to hear and see people who've got through the other side and are okay now, and that gives them the hope and belief and trust that there is hope for them too, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that was going to be my next question, like what's different about hearing from somebody who has gone through that experience? Do you maybe just want to expand on that a little bit, Tyson, as well, about how it is different for somebody who might be going through that experience themselves to be hearing somebody who has gone through suicidal experience?
It relates to all mental illnesses, really. A lot of people with a mental illness don't see anybody else but themselves, so they see they're the only ones going through it, whereas it's not the case. A lot of people have gone through it. A lot of people are going through that similar things. And sometimes it's really, really nice for them to hear that there is hope on the other side. And, with some interventions, it can get better. You can improve. You can make goals. You can achieve goals.
I think someone with a lived experience has more credibility than someone who just says, maybe you could do this or maybe you could do that.
The parent or the friend, can sometimes come off as nagging this person to, you're not going to footy training or whatever. Why don't you go to footy training? And then you push them into it. And it's really got to come from someone that understands. And that's the kind of is, look, I've been here before. I've felt this myself. And you just see the weight lift off them. And they go, so you get it. You get what I'm feeling. And then the conversation flows from there. And that's sort of the in of the lived experience person, is that they can then encourage this thing without it becoming or seeming like it's nagging, like a friend or a parent might be.
I think you're more likely to say things like, oh, so when you're unwell, what makes you feel better? Because you know that when you're unwell, there are certain things that make you feel better. And I guess, you kind of ask questions more than tell, where family and friends sometimes are so desperate for that person to be well, they just kind of tell them what to do, and that doesn't really work.
Tell me about the process of, maybe for you, Tyson, about sharing your lived experience. What does that kind of look like, and what contexts are kind of places where that might happen for you?
Yeah, it was made really easy for me to share my lived experience because it was the job description. That's what I was employed to do as a peer worker. And so that's what I did. And the more I shared, the more people I realised I was actually helping. So I don't share everything with everyone, but I select little bits that I think are going to assist someone that are going through similar things, and I share those parts. And I share the positives that have come out of those. Not just that, it happened to me too, and end it there. It's you've got to share that bit of hope for everyone, and that's really what is that shining light that people sort of grasp onto and go, all right, well, if you're okay and you've got through it, then I can do it too. And there's kind of a little story which I can get into of someone that I was seeing as a peer worker, and they were kind of very depressed and suicidal, and they didn't see the way out, and they didn't have a job, they didn't have a house, they were living with their parents. So I spoke to them and I said, if nothing changes, nothing changes. So you've got to make a change for something to change. And he looked at me and he really took it in. I could see he took it in. And I spoke to him a few months later because I caught up with him down the street or something. And he came up to me and he said, you changed my life. Just like that little phrase of, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And then it just clicked with him, well, I have to change something. I have to actually do something. And then 3 months later, and he was like, he'd had a job, he got into a new house, like by himself and that sort of thing. Like all this had really changed just from that conversation. Yeah. And that hope that I inspired that, things can change. I went through the whole story about how I was a mechanic and then I changed jobs, and, that was the change that I needed, and, everyone needs changes and that sort of thing. So yeah, that was really, really good to hear. And I mean, it's so simple, isn't it? It's simple to me to say it, but it's at the same time, it's really powerful. Like saying something and really meaning it and really having something behind it that pushes it along. It's really hard when you're in that rut to see a way out. And sometimes it just takes a lived experience worker or someone with lived experience that's gone through it before to say, hey, I can see you down there. How about a hand out? And this is the way. And, sort of give them that boost and let them see that there is a way out. Because when you're in that sort of rut, you can't say way out. The only way out is to
just keep going and
just end up worse.
Is there something that has about sharing your lived experience that's kind of helped you in that healing process?
Yeah, definitely. I think early on I sort of started writing my life story. But when I got into this sort of position, I stopped writing because I was sharing that with everyone on a daily basis. So it really is healing to tell other people, this is where I was and this is where I am now. And at the same time, you're providing hope to them, but you're also validating yourself in how far you've actually come.
There might be some people who have gone through this experience who might be thinking, hey, you know what, if it's so helpful, I should kind of share my story and I should help people who might be in the same situation that I was in, or kind of help them, come out of that situation. What are some of the sort of considerations and things that they should be thinking about before they kind of go too far down that track?
Yeah, I guess that's something that I've seen people do recently without having any education about how to do it, and that can be triggering for them. That can re-traumatise them, and it can also traumatise other people listening to the story. Both Tyson and I have had a little bit of training in how to share our story in a way that that doesn't trigger us. So there is training available to learn to share your lived experience in a way that's helpful. And I've got an example, actually. A friend of mine was working in community and sharing their story, and they did a speech at a services and was so passionate about sharing the story and sharing about how those services should be helping in a better way that they overshared their story because they hadn't had training. I actually was there and I said to the person, "Are you okay?" And they said, "Yeah, I'm fine, no problem." But I later found out that person went home and it was really not a good thing for them because they'd overshared too many details, and then they were worried about what they'd said and it wasn't helpful. And that was a really good example for me that if we're going to work with lived experience to share stories, we actually need some specific training around how to do that to make sure it's safe for the person sharing the story and the person listening. Wellways do their own training, which is kind of a week-long training, or I think it's only 3 days now. So that's a lived experience storytelling. There's another really great service called Roses in the Ocean. They teach people to share their lived experience story in a safe way. So I've had a couple of people trained with Roses in the Ocean and a couple of people trained in the more extensive Wellways training.
For two people whose job it is to, talk about, amongst other things, suicide, what are some of the things that you would say to people who might have some casual contact with people who, might be thinking about heading down that road?
Just be kind, I think, is probably the main thing, and non-judgmental. If someone divulges that they are thinking about suicide or they have suicide ideation, really just do your best to listen and seek help for that person.
Yeah, listening's a huge thing, and it's really hard when it's someone you love. It's really hard to not say, "You're not thinking of suicide, are you?" Which is the complete wrong thing to say, because of course they're going to say, no, I'm not, or that's a stupid idea or something like that. It's really hard to not put judgment on it because you're panicking for that person because you care about them. So I guess, as Tyson said, just that non-judgmental listening and listening till everything comes out, because sometimes there is one key reason or one key thing that they can't solve or that is hurtful, that once it's out, there is that way out, because that, you can talk about what are the things we could do to solve this problem. But if that problem stays hidden, it's really hard to help them. So really listening and not talking is so important.
I'm going to ask you one more question. If you could sort of change one thing about the community to make suicide prevention better, what would it be?
Just take a little bit more time to say hi to someone. And when you ask them how they are, don't keep walking. Ask them how they are and really listen to what they say, because I think that would make such a huge difference to people. If you Google Kevin Hines, you'll hear about his story. He decided to take his own life, and he was travelling to the destination where he was going to do that. He was crying. He was upset on the bus. He was in turmoil. It was pretty obvious to other people that he was upset, and he made a pact with himself. If someone asks me, am I all right, I won't do it. Travelled to the destination. Nobody asked him. Even someone actually asked, can you take a photo? And he took a photo of the person for them and then proceeded to attempt to take his own life. And nobody asked, not one person asked. And he passed a lot of people, and he sat on the bus sobbing. He was sobbing. And everyone just had that, I don't want to get involved, or I shouldn't get involved attitude. And he actually survived, which is great. And he's an amazing speaker now. He goes around the world speaking about suicide and about asking and talking to people when they're unwell and how you can help. If someone's upset and you can ask and you've got time to listen, I mean, it's really important that you don't ask unless you've got the time to sit down with them and listen. If you can't do it, then maybe get somebody else to do it. But don't leave people alone if you're worried about them. Just ask them or get somebody else to ask them.
I think also challenging your own stigmas as well. I mentioned that I'd gone off medications a few times in the early days of my experiences, and that was stigma-based. I didn't believe I should take medication for having a mental illness. I didn't think that was, something I needed to do. But we have our own stigma, and that comes out at different times. And if you can challenge your own stigma and say, well, why am I actually thinking that way? And is that the right way to think? And how am I coming across? if I'm thinking that. So yeah, challenging your own stigma about anything mental health related, but especially suicide. You know, if someone is struggling and you sort of, as Michelle said, if you sort of say, oh, you're not thinking about it, are you? That's a very stigmatized way of thinking about. And if you're more compassionate and you think about approaching that in a kinder way, you're going to get a different result. And the person's probably going to open up to you and be able to feel confident and comfortable talking with you.
If any of the topics in this interview have affected you in any way, support is available via Lifeline on 13 11 14. Michelle mentioned lived experience training done by an organisation called Roses in the Ocean. We spoke to Bronwyn Edwards, who's the founder of Roses in the Ocean, about her campaign to make the voices of people with lived experience front and centre of the fight for suicide prevention. For that and more interviews about suicide prevention in Gippsland, check out the Gippsland PHN website. And to finish off, one of the ways that Tyson is coming to terms with his experience is through poetry. He was good enough to share one of his poems about his lived experience after our chat.
Lived experience. What do you say when you're describing your life, when you're trying to find the words for being in strife, having a constant battle on your hands, and everything is ruining all of your plans? When a mental illness you are dealt, a loved one's or one for yourself. Lived experience is a word that can describe all the pain you felt on this crazy ride. It's a broad explanation of what you've been through and how you've learnt to cope and do everything you do. A wealth of knowledge and open book, telling those around how much your life has been shook, almost to the point that there's no coming back. But you're up here telling people now you're on the right track. Inspiring others all around, a helping hand from the ground. To have lived experience, you're saying you've been there before. Now you're helping others find the exit door.